Bledsoe is a lecturer on public policy and climate change at the Center for Environmental Policies at American University in Washington, and he joins me from New York. Paul, what are some of the things you'll be watching for at this year's conference?
Well, I think there's suddenly a recognition that it is very late indeed in the climate crisis, that we need more immediate and bigger actions by major countries. For example, China is in the process of building several hundred coal-fired power plants. I'm hopeful that the Chinese will reverse course and not build those power plants. I also think the other major nations, including in the EU, Canada, Japan, many others, need to make bigger commitments. We are risking a climatic meltdown, a hothouse planet of cascading, unrelenting heat that is going to really literally change the face of the earth and cost trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars in economic growth as well as untold suffering. So we're looking for world leaders to make deep, direct commitments. The fact that Donald Trump showed up is an embarrassment to the United States. Donald Trump is the biggest single enemy of climate action, and the most important thing that can happen in the next year is to get him out of the White House and put in someone who will deal with climate change.
I thought it was interesting that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres repeatedly warned countries, basically what you said, enough with your empty promises. That's not going to fight climate change. He says, basically, don't come to this summit with beautiful speeches, come with concrete plans of actions and strategies. Are you really optimistic we're going to see that?
I think that we are going to begin to see it. I think China is going to show leadership. I think India is going to show leadership. I think the European Union is going to show leadership. Interestingly, there's some very important action by private sector. One of the world's largest heating and cooling companies, Ingersoll Rand, has committed to a gigaton of greenhouse gas emission reductions in the next decade. That's the largest ever private sector commitment. So there are signs that we can do this, but it's not a moment too soon. We are at risk of losing the Arctic ice shield in the next 20 years. If that happens, we may unleash climate change that is out of control, that is self-reinforcing. It's time that we recognize that this is the single most important national security and economic issue in the world.
And boy, tell me your thoughts on this 16-year-old Greta Thunberg that talked about being able to convey her message in a passionate, articulate way. What's been the reaction to her there?
I think there's a recognition that we are consigning our young people to a hothouse planet that is going to be very difficult to live in, that is going to inflict untold misery, especially on the world's poorest. And her voice is very critical. When I was working for President Clinton in the late 1990s, we had a similar movement, but then Bush took power and now Trump. We have to elect leaders who will act. It is not enough to just protest. We have to gain political power and act.
And one of the fundamental injustices of climate change, Paul, is that wealthier countries emit the most greenhouse gas emissions, but yet it's the poorest countries who contribute the least that stand to suffer. Is there going to be some kind of help for these smaller countries? And very quickly, please, because we're running out of time.
That's exactly right. When the Secretary General said we have to create a fund of at least $100 billion a year by next year from the rich countries to help the poor countries deal with warming that's already happened and prevent future warming, it's a crisis and we need to act.
Thank you very much, Paul Bledsoe.